Hey everybody, week 10. I mean, we're moving through this at a frightening pace. Week 10, you'll have an exam this week, and it would be, it's fairly easy. You'll have a study guide which will be released soon, and then you can start working on that. And then go ahead and then knock out the exam. Um, let's talk about detectives. The first thing that needs to be understood with detectives is many students come into this discipline and they think, I'll get my bachelor's degree. It'll make me really um, high quality candidate. I'll get hired, go through the academy, and then tell them that I want to go work detective. So that's my job. My job is going to be a detective. And there's a harsh reality with that is that doesn't happen. You will go through the academy, and then if you go to the sheriff's department, you're going to work in the correction system. You're going to work in the jails for quite a period of time. LASO or LA Sheriffs, I think, has that knocked down a little bit with people that just all they want to do is work in the custody facility. So that gives you a little bit smaller pool. If you're in a regular police department, a local police agency, then you will be working patrol. You'll have to go through patrol for a period of time and prove yourself that you can work on your own, that you are aggressive, that you are. And here's a key term: if you're going to see this, that you're relentless. You are. When you do your investigations in the field, you are always trying to find the person responsible for the crime. You're relentless. And not a lot of people have that quality. Exceptionally important quality to have. Kind of the image we have of, Detective Bureau is, nice clothes, men, nice suits, women are all, look sharp, and they have a partner that is, according to TV, often of the opposite sex, often a little bit of intrigue between the two. That the detectives all work in teams and go out. They look at the scene. They talk about stuff. They try to find who the perpetrator is, the bad guy. They identify somebody, they do an interview, and he's arrested. Very little tedious paperwork. And most times now, modernly, on television at least, advanced scientific techniques solve it, whether it's DNA or some other thing that we haven't seen for years and years. And that's not true. Here's the reality: mostly office work. The cases are assigned to you. The patrol officer writes a report, does an initial investigation. It goes to a supervisor. A supervisor approves the report, goes through the record system. A copy goes to detectives. Detective supervisor looks at it. He assigns the case out. You work basically by discipline, whether it's crimes against persons, property crimes. There may be a white-collar crime or a computer crime. There's going to be a fraud. Division, you'll have minor thefts will be another area. So a lot of it is just reading cases and then calling people up and basically doing another interview that with the stuff that was left out of the initial police report by the field officer. And then out of all the cases that you get, only a few are actually workable. Those cases that that can be cleared are are pretty far and few in between the other cases. So when the cops come out to the scene of a crime, if probable cause exists for an arrest, only about half the time nationally do you see an arrest made. Um, and it can be a lot of different influences. It can be the officer themselves. It can be the type of crime. It can be who the victim is. It could be a bunch of other different attendant circumstances that may not result in an arrest. Um, you're going to see the initial investigation in the field. That idea is to, first off, make the scene safe. Second off, identify witnesses. Third off, identify physical evidence and interview the witnesses in the field, collect evidence, or have an evidence technician, commonly known as CSI, come out and collect the evidence. And one thing I left out of that, which is the most important thing, is once the scene's safe, is to provide aid to victims. And you might even have to provide aid to victims when it's a really hot scene, when there's bad stuff going on. Initial response can be a real difficult, very challenging incident. And the funny part is, not funny, but when we look at TV and movies, you seldom see the chaos of the initial call. It's always when the detectives show up and here's a dead guy, and scenes can be exceptionally chaotic. Evidence gets destroyed, and there's a joke amongst policemen that when fire departments call for medical aid, their first responsibility is to come in and drive over all of the evidence they can find. Terribly chaotic scenes. Now the scene's been stabilized, or if investigators aren't going to be called out, and they only get called out in a small sliver of major crimes, not on every crime, or not certainly not every crime, but not like you see a lot of times where there'll be an assault or there's some other crime and detectives are called out for whatever reason. It's not the way it goes. Then you have the follow-up investigation that will have the investigative supervisor will assign the case. And a lot of those are going to be assigned with priorities, based on not only the workable leads, meaning the ability to solve the case, but also if there's any political issues going on. So remember, police department, while not an elected position, is a highly political position. That of police, chief of police, and can be fired at the whim of the council. So, and it it can get really bad. There was I'm familiar with a situation where a mayor of a city and his wife go out and have a few cocktails. They get home, the domestic starts, and at some point in time, he pulls out a gun and shoots the wife in the head. Well, fortunately, the bullet just grazes the side of her and doesn't kill her. Well, the mayor calls the chief of police. The chief of police, not a super experienced field cop, because he's been an administrator for most of his career, shows up and then calls another administrator who has a little bit more sense. They get the woman taken care of. There's a report taken. The mayor's not arrested. And this is a little bit before domestic violence laws changed. But you can see what a mess that was in the initial response in the beginning of the follow-up investigation. In your investigation, you're going to have in the follow-up, 3 activities, and routine stuff where you're interviewing witnesses, maybe going back out and look at the crime scene, making sure the evidence has been taken care of properly. Secondary activities are going to be looking for witnesses, or trying to locate witnesses, knocking on doors, and then seeing if there's other information that may come from either new witnesses or the existing witnesses. Finally, the third level of activities is going to patrol. And there's not that much conversation between detectives and patrol, to be honest with you. Remember, one of the ways that an investigator is judged is by whether or not they can clear cases. Meaning, can they get a case and be able to say that it has been solved? And it can be solved in a bunch of different ways. It can be solved with an arrest. It can be solved if maybe a victim no longer wants to prosecute. It can be solved if the person's arrested for something else and is unavailable to be arrested by y'all or by the agency. And then finally is what's called exceptional, cleared exceptional. Very important part of what an investigator does. So sometimes they withhold information from patrol. Usually detective bureaus are set up into a bullpen type environment with cubicles. Well, the good part about that is there's an awful lot of discussion that goes on between different detectives. And so a detective that maybe has one or a series of cases and another detective looking for a suspect with a similar description, or they know the guy, he's known to the police. Some of that can be put together pretty easily. The downside is that kind of ruins the whole concept of the TV or movie detective with their own office and the glass windows and the really kind of neat private setup. Doesn't really happen that way. Another way is looking through records and looking at whatever database kind of information is available. One thing that I want to really stress is that idea of social media. People say stupid things on social media. You may have been cruising around and you see some knucklehead, who's maybe a gangster, standing with his picture, holding a couple guns, some holding dope, bragging about crimes they've committed, and all of that stuff is available. Very important part of this, this process is being savvy in social media. Some older detectives now aren't. By the time people in this room, or not this room, but in this class, make detectives, you're going to be savvy with it. You're going to know how to look things up and how to get into people's materials. So, testable material. Nominal caseload, workable caseload, actual caseload. Nominal caseload, that's a total number of cases assigned to detectives, to a detective, okay, to a detective. So maybe they have a caseload, a nominal caseload of 75 cases, 75 active cases. But within that 75, only 5 or 6 or 7 are actually workable. There's workable leads. A great place to look at this is fraud. The fraud detectives get buried with stuff. They have a whole, a big nominal caseload. Their workable caseload is actually is higher than that, but the actual caseload, the cases that they work, are a lot smaller because there's so many cases. So, nominal caseload, workable caseload, actual caseload. About 21% of the cases reported that make it to detectives get solved. And that is that whole idea of cleared cases. And just to reiterate that, identify an offender and prosecute him. 2, maybe sufficient information to charge the suspect or a person. And 3, then the factors exist that are beyond the control of the officer. Like, the guy dies. In the course of my career, working cases, I had probably a dozen people that died before they could go to trial from various things. Overdoses, accidents, murders. So that does happen. Now, when you look at cases, the caseload, that 21% solving rate or solvability rate, that's an interesting deal because about 36 to or 35 to 40% of all cases are reported, of crime is reported. So of that 40%, 21% get solved. That's a pretty small number of actual cases that are solved. And through a lot of reasons. I would be curious though now with so much more video out there, if the case solved cases, cleared cases percentage goes up. I'd be interested to see that. So that's going to be about it that we're going to talk about with detectives or investigation right now. Those are the things that you most likely will likely see in the course of the exam, at least. Oh, one thing I want to make sure that you understand. The only way you can solve a crime is through physical evidence, a witness, or a confession. Only 3 ways to solve a crime. So think of all of the DNA. You can solve a crime with DNA. Well, DNA, you need a sample left at the scene, which is also known as physical evidence. You can fingerprint, physical evidence. Somebody can identify them, witness. So that's another important thing that you very well might see. Okay, let's see if we were able to do this a little bit more quickly. Hope you guys are having a good week, and I'll see you in class. Good luck on the exam.